Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathaniel. I particularly love movies, and I want to share that with you. From the horrifying to the terrifying, the spine-chilling to the hair-raising, along with the straight-up disgusting. WWW is your place for all things movies. Stick around, and we'll leave you with a movie that will make your blood run cold.
88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Wednesdays, the show where we talk about 3 movies all in the same night. And for tonight's episode, newsflash, it's almost Halloween. It's this Friday. And for the entire month of October, to get us kind of warmed up for Halloween, I've been talking about nothing but horror movies for the entire month of October. For tonight's episode, we are going to round out that entire month of horror with a final trilogy of horror movies. And before you ask, no, we are not going to be talking about movies from the Halloween franchise, even though that would make total sense with Halloween being just around the corner. But I promise you, we are talking about a trilogy that is just as iconic as the Halloween series, if not a little more. Tonight, we are going to be covering the Scream trilogy. We're going to be starting off with the first movie on our watch list tonight, that being the original Scream from 1996, followed up by Scream 2 from 1997, and closing out the night with Scream 3 from 2000. And before we go any further, I'd like to address that yes, there are in fact more than just 3 movies in the Scream franchise. But there's also more than 3 in the Halloween franchise, so you know what? I could have picked either of them, and we could still be here talking about an iconic horror slasher franchise before Halloween. So there's no real room to complain, is there? We're gonna be going with Scream, because that's the one I wanted to go with. Alright? Cool. So, after we get back from the music break, we will jump into the original Scream. So stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Scream from 1996, available to watch now on Paramount+. For the basic plot summary of the original Scream, it is as follows. With the 1-year anniversary of her mother's death fast approaching, Sidney Prescott must fight for survival against a brutal killer who is terrorizing her small town of Woodsboro, California. And while I say that out loud, it may sound a bit hard to follow. You know, you've got the 1-year anniversary of her mother's death, and now a new killer is springing up and attacking people. It's really not all that hard to follow now that I explain it like that, with a lot less long-windedness. So that's great. You know what else is great? This movie. It's a classic. It's iconic. People know it. People love it. People remember it, and people won't stop talking about how much they love it, remember it, and know it. That's for a good reason, partially because the opening 13 minutes of Scream, holy goodness, the opening 13 minutes of Scream from 1996 is so very good. And I know that may sound a bit weird to say out loud. It's a bit like this. You guys have heard of the movie Whiplash, right? Well, you do understand that the movie Whiplash came from a short film also called Whiplash, before it was made into a feature-length movie. And when it was made into a feature-length movie, it still included pretty much every part of the original short film, just reshot and a little bit upgraded for cinematic appeal, right? So think of that. Think of that situation. And now imagine that instead of them having that original short film, they just made essentially the original short film and then kept going and didn't have to go through that awkward phase where it was first a short film and was just from the beginning the feature-length movie Whiplash. Now take that and apply it to Scream, and that's exactly what I think happened, or at least they sure did it like that, and it sure feels like they did that. Again, first 13 minutes with Drew Barrymore is some of the most effective, suspenseful horror you will see in a mainline slasher series. And that is mostly just my opinion. But I was pretty enthralled by it. And that takes a little bit of doing to do. Because usually with slasher movies, it's just like, oh, when's he going to show up? With the first 13 minutes of Scream, you do not know when he's going to show up. You're horrified that he is showing up at all. And you are so concerned about what he's going to do when he shows up. Even when you're watching it for the second time, I gotta admit, I was still pretty tense watching this scene again, and I'd already seen the movie once before. So that, to me, says everything you need to know about the first 13 minutes, and we can move on to the general point concerning those first 13 minutes, which is, yes, they're iconic, they're great, and they're awesome, but it's not like they overshadow the rest of the movie. You still got like at least an hour and a half left to go after you see those first 13 minutes. And is it worth it? Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's one big thing you gotta remember. Scream is iconic for so many reasons, one of them being that opening scene, but it's also iconic in the sense that I think there's kind of a stigmata surrounding parody movies in that you can only really parody something by referencing it, and maybe you can't exactly make something that's better than what you're referencing, and you kind of get bogged down in references. At least I'm going to pretend like that's the stigmata, so I can say with full confidence that Scream stands above pretty much any other parody you could watch, at least in my opinion. Scream has always had the reputation in my mind since I first saw it, and especially after rewatching it, that it is both a really good example of a slasher movie and a great example of a parody, because a good parody is a movie that can take all the tropes that it's making fun of and make a better movie out of those tropes than the things they are referencing. And let me tell you, in my opinion, Scream accomplishes that goal in spades. It is probably the best slasher I have seen, at the very least. And I've seen some of the iconic ones. I've seen the original Halloween. I've seen Nightmare on Elm Street. I've seen the original Friday the 13th. I've seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I talked about Maniac Cop last week. Those were slashers. I've seen a handful here and there outside of those main ones. And still, I would say, even in comparison to things like Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream is better. It just is better, in my opinion, but it is. It is so much better. It achieves a lot more. It takes the tropes of those movies and of their time periods, flips them on its head, and does it better. One of the most important details surrounding that is the killer himself. Now, when you've heard of Scream, you've probably heard of the ghost face mask. And when it comes time for Halloween, you'll likely see a bunch of teenagers wearing the Scream ghost face mask and dressing up as Ghostface because it's a really easy thing to do. Let me tell you, just because they're dressed up like that and just because you've seen it all the time does not detract from the fact that the villain Ghostface in Scream is horrifying. He is fast, he is competent, he has a little voice that makes your blood actually run cold. He is not able to just be pushed off of you. And that leads nicely into our next point surrounding Scream, which is that despite the fact that they have every single female character fight back against the main villain, he still is able to progress. He's still able to make some headway and possibly kill them. Every female character fights back in some capacity. And that is something you don't always see in slasher movies, especially not in Halloween. Not every female character fights back, just Laurie. Laurie Strode does fight back in some capacity, but not always. She doesn't always fight back against Michael Myers in the original movie. But every female character fights back against Ghostface. And he's still threatening. That's a real fine line to ride, but man, do they walk all over it like they own it. Because they do, as far as I'm concerned. I honestly think them casting Neve Campbell as the main character of Sydney gave them plenty of permission to walk over that line like they owned it. Because she does that good of a job. She is so competent, she's so good, she's so well performed. I love Neve Campbell, she's so good. Sydney's a great character, I love her, she's great. She's a contender against probably Linda Hamilton as, not Sarah Connor. I was about to say Sidney Carpenter for some reason. No, Sarah Connor in Terminator movies. Sidney Prescott is that good. But she's not better than Sarah Connor, you know. She's still pretty good. I think what I really want to say as a final bit of a statement on Scream is that yes, the opening is good. And yes, the middle segment is also pretty good. The middle section can range from just all right to pretty darn good, with the pretty just all right parts having very forgivable issues. Just because it's just all right doesn't mean bad, and it doesn't mean that there's anything detracting from them. They just may not be as good as some of the other scenes that are also in the midsection. But I can say this much. Even knowing the ending, and I'm not going to spoil the ending because I would highly recommend watching this movie if you haven't. Even knowing the ending to Scream, the ending still is a total punch. It still pulls every single hit off flawlessly. You still get to the point of mania. You still get to knowing exactly what's going on and why it's going on. And you understand how obvious it was from the very beginning. Especially on a second watch through, because you know what the twist is going to be. But that doesn't take away from the suspense of when it gets revealed. I could say that with confidence. I love Scream. And with all that being said, we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we will jump into Scream 2 to hear if I loved that one. Stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Scream 2 from 1997, available to watch now on Paramount+. For the basic plot summary of Scream 2, we follow Sidney Prescott once again as she must deal with the release of Stab, which is an in-universe movie within a movie based on the events of the first Scream movie in our reality. She must also deal with the fact that the release of this movie has caused a new Ghostface to appear. Okay, so let's back up here for a second and acknowledge the fact that I just said movie within a movie and Scream within our reality, okay? Let's break this down. So, Scream happens in the universe of Scream, the series of movies, right? The events of that movie happen. I'm not going to spoil it. And later, they decide in the universe of Scream to make a movie, right? So it's a movie within a movie. And this movie within a movie is called Stab. It is based on the events of the first Scream movie's events. I think I'm explaining this properly, but it's really difficult for me to explain meta stuff on a radio show. I'm gonna be fully honest with you, it's very difficult. So I'm gonna ask if you guys are lost, and because you can't respond, I'm gonna assume you said yes. And so I'm gonna reassure you that if you were to watch Scream 2, you'd understand it. Okay? Okay. Because honestly, the movie does a much better job of explaining it. And when it comes to meta stuff, you really have to just watch the movie to understand it. And that can kind of be a gamble if it's not done particularly well. So it's like, oh man, I just wasted a bunch of time. But with Scream 2, it does it pretty well. And you understand it pretty immediately. You can kind of wrap your head around the idea with relative ease, I will say. And part of that has to do with the fact that, in all honesty, Scream 2 is weirdly better than I was originally planning to give it credit for without having watched it. I went into Scream 2 thinking to myself, well, I'm interested. I'm curious to see if it's any good. It does sound pretty good, and I'm kind of excited for it, but I don't know if it's going to be better than the original, because a lot of sequels just aren't. And there's a reason it's got that stigmata, because usually they just aren't. But when it came to Scream 2, I was surprised, not by the fact that it wasn't better than the first movie, but I was surprised by the fact that it understood that. See, usually when it comes to things like Back to the Future Part 2, I feel like there's this kind of inherent cheesiness to the production quality, and there's this almost like kind of lackluster feeling where they're just doing certain things from the first movie again, or they're just kind of like capitalizing on the first movie in a really just kind of watered down version in a way that just doesn't feel authentic to me. Sequels can really fall into that category. And when it comes to Scream 2, they don't avoid any of that stuff. But they acknowledge it. They understand that it's gonna feel like that. And so they take the fact that they feel like that it feels like that as a movie, and just run with it. Huge surprise on my end to watch a movie do that. Huge surprise to watch a movie do that. Not so surprising that it's Scream 2 of all things, because one of the genius parts of the original movie is how it tied in its references to other slashers overall and just kind of explained movies as a whole culture type of thing as part of its plot. Not explained, but incorporated it as part of its plot or as part of its humor or as part of its just overall DNA structure. So when they're making a sequel, it honestly makes sense that it would then take the DNA associated with sequels and burn it into itself and become a little more self-referential, become a little bit more self-deprecating. And while it doesn't make it better than the first movie by any stretch of the imagination, at least in my opinion, it certainly isn't far off in terms of quality from the original. It doesn't have a huge drop-off in quality. If anything, it's really only like a little bit worse than the original. It's just a little bit downgrade in quality. Not a unnoticeable amount, but not enough to cause a big stink over. And so I'm not going to cause a big stink over it. I'm honestly going to say this much. I think the acting is still good. They still have Neve Campbell. They have a bunch of new characters that are also very well performed. They have some really interesting moments. They have still a very good opening scene, which, I mean, with the first movie, you can't top it, so they don't choose to. They instead almost do a bit of a self-parody in a way, and I really like that scene in particular. I will say this much. Part of the reason this was not a downgrade in quality has to come down to the fact that they still had Kevin Williamson writing the script. I honestly think that Kevin Williamson's script for the first movie is what made it good. I mean, granted, Wes Craven was the director, and he's iconic, and he directed Nightmare on Elm Street and a bunch of other classic horror movies. And it's like, okay, it makes sense why he's then associated with Scream, and it's kind of like a perfect pick for that type of a thing. And so it works well, sure. But looking at the original Scream, I was surprised to see how good the dialogue was in a lot of those scenes, and how well it portrayed the story, not through just the dialogue, but just how quickly the scenes would move and how well the story was structured. And looking at Scream 2, I can see a lot of that same DNA. Once again, I can see a lot of those same sort of tropes that he had, the same style, the same approach, just with a little bit more cynicism because it doesn't need to exist. And it knows it doesn't need to exist. And again, is just going, yeah, we know. We're in on this joke with you guys. Let's just poke fun at ourselves a little bit. I really appreciate that. And I can honestly say that because of that, I'm also willing to go along with the ending. It may not be perfect. It may not be as good as the first movie's ending, but it's still pretty good, all things considered. It's still plenty good. It's a heck of a lot better than the ending to Scream 3, that's for sure. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and we got to go to music break. So when we come back, we'll jump into Scream 3. Yay. Stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our third and final movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Scream 3 from 2000, available to watch now on Paramount+. For the basic plot summary of Scream 3, now living in isolation, Sidney Prescott must deal with another ghost face targeting the cast of Stab 3, this being the third movie in the in-universe Stab series. Right? So do you remember from Scream 2 how there was this whole plot about them making a movie based on the events of the original Scream in a movie within a movie setting, and it's called Stab. So now in Scream 3, they're all the way up to Stab 3 now. I almost said Scream 3 again, and it's like, it's up to Stab 3. Okay, so you get the way it's organized? No? Well, that's good to know, because I'll be honest, with Scream 2, I could say that it explained itself pretty well with the whole meta setup. With Scream 3, this is when I put my foot down and say, it's too meta. Go back, stop, back up. We can no longer say that the movie explains itself better than I can, because if I'm being completely honest, it really doesn't. And why is that? Well, that's because, in my opinion, but also, yeah, Scream 3 is just really lame. That feels like such a stupid way of saying it, but it feels like a lame way of saying it. But, I mean, if the movie wanted me to be more creative with the adjective that I was going to describe it with, maybe it wouldn't have decided to be lame. How's that? Maybe be better. Scream 3, you hear me? Maybe you should have just been better. I don't know what to tell you. I'm getting way too angry at a movie right now, which, I mean, usually tends to happen for me. But I can't really get too angry at a movie that's this brain dead. I'll be honest. I can't. Because it's more disappointing than anything else. With how well the second movie pulled itself off, you could have had a really good, fitting conclusion to the Scream trilogy. And of course, they were planning on making this the end of the trilogy, but because it was Hollywood, they went out and made like 3 other sequels and probably a 4th sequel at some other point to just Scream 3. You know, I know there's technically like 6 if you can count, but I can't count, so I'm not gonna like start counting right now. We're just gonna move on, and we're gonna acknowledge the fact that Scream 3 could have been a much better ending for the 3 of them, and it just isn't. Part of the issue is the fact that the writing is so lackluster. With Scream 2, I made the important point that it was good because they still had Kevin Williamson on board, and he was still writing the script for Scream 2, which is why it felt so refreshing, but on brand for it to acknowledge the fact that it was a cheesy little sequel that didn't need to exist, and could really just revel in that idea. With Scream 3, he's not writing the script. And so it comes across as lacking his polish, lacking his style, lacking his ideas behind the original Scream, and Scream 2 for that matter, that made those movies work. And because of that, it just really falls flat, particularly in the dialogue option. I know I said the dialogue was part of the strength of these 2 movies. It is. Scream 3's dialogue is just so generic and lame and stupid that at certain points, okay, how do I not spoil this? I know how to not spoil this. There's a part where a character dies, right? And one of the other characters goes to check on this dead person and, you know, does the whole holds hand up to the throat to make sure the heartbeat's still there, and then it's not there. It's like, and somebody asks this person, is he dead? Is he dead? What do you think? You saw him get killed with a weapon. Yes, he's dead. This is a slasher movie. He's dead. This angered me so incredibly. Not because it's a trope, not because it's generic. It angered me so much because this is Scream. This is the kind of thing that Scream would do, and the reaction would be, yes, what? Yes, he's dead. You saw him. What do you mean? And Scream 3 just plays it completely straight. I know this is such a big thing to get all up in arms about, but it's exactly that kind of situation where it takes everything the first 2 Scream movies stood for. And this isn't just this one example. There's so many things that I could get into, but I'm not going to. It takes everything that was a part of the DNA of the parody, the references, the understanding of how to make a better slasher movie than the things that came before it, and make an engaging plot, and just throws it all out the window. It was a bad idea to not have Kevin Williamson write the script. Reading up on his plans for it, it sounded a lot better. I'll be honest. Even though it doesn't exist, it sounded a lot better than the movie that we ended up getting. Man, I didn't expect to get that angry at this tonight, but you know what? I think it kind of deserves it. Scream 3 has some interesting ideas, I'll give it that much, but at its core, I think the real issue is it lost the plot. And I mean that both in the sense that it lost the identity of the other two movies. But it also quite literally lost its own plot. Like, you know how I mentioned that Ghostface is apparently targeting the cast of Stab 3 or something like that? Yeah, you'd be surprised how little that has impacted the plot by a specific point in the movie where it absolutely should have impacted the plot. That's what I'm getting at, that's for sure. I will honestly say that the opening scene is, like, fine. It's nowhere near as good as the opening to even Scream 2 by comparison. I can't even remember what the opening scene was at this point, and I don't really want to. What I do remember is the ending to Scream 3, and how much that infuriated me. I can't even talk about it because it's a spoiler, and I don't want to spoil this movie. But, I mean, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's no way I'm going to rewatch Scream 3 at any point in the future, just in general. But if I was to ever rewatch the movie to begin with, I would still never change my mind of the ending not working. I already know how I'd really prefer this trilogy to end. I know what would be better. And of course, I know the weight that comes with that, with being a college student on a radio station talking about how he knows how they could have ended this $1 million franchise better. But you know what? I mean, maybe they should have just made a better movie if they didn't want me to criticize it. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. I feel like that's fair. I feel like that's fair. I think the last thing that I can criticize Scream 3 for, lest I go into a yelling fit, is the fact that it's apparently supposed to be more comedic than the other two, and I couldn't tell because I wasn't laughing. That's a really bad sign. That's a really bad sign, isn't it? And it's not like the first two were really comedies anyways. They just kind of had some hypermania moments to them. The third movie, it's just like, okay, it's trying to be funny. Is it? I can't tell what are jokes anymore. None of this really lines up to me. Yeah, that's all I gotta say. For now, at the very least. Because while I may have just yelled at Scream 3, I can talk about the other Scream movies. And I'm planning on talking about the other Scream movies this upcoming Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. here on 88.1 The Burg for What to Watch Weekends. We have to push the show back because there's football this Saturday, so I'll be on this Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. here on 88.1 The Burg. I want to thank you all for listening in to What to Watch Wednesdays tonight. I will be back next Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. here on 88.1 The Burg, like I always am, for another episode of What to Watch Wednesdays. Please be sure to follow along with either show, both What to Watch Wednesdays and What to Watch Weekends, on Instagram and YouTube at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces. And again, I'll be back next Wednesday telling you all what to watch. Good night, everybody.